Last Sunday, we got into just trying to bring us up to date, question number 24. Why was it especially painful for God to see Israel go the way that it's going, departure into idolatry? And we saw in chapter 9 and verse 10, I found Israel. This is how he finds Israel from the beginning. Hosea does a lot of this. We've seen it. He'll go back to history of maybe, as we'll see in his next few chapters, he goes back to the history of the life of Jacob to give illustrations of where they've been and maybe what they ought to be. And here I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. If you found grapes in the wilderness, that would be just be a blessing. Joe Turlington finds dewberries over in that wilderness, over that lot over there, and it makes great cobbler. Now don't tell me where dewberries come from, but he's found quite a harvest, and it's just a blessing to be able to gather that fruit in that wilderness over there. And some of us enjoy that. I found Israel like grapes in the wilderness. I saw her fathers. I saw your fathers as the first ripe. The season opens as the first ripe fig, as in this season. And it came to Baal Peor and consecrated themselves on the shameful thing. I found you like this, and you wasn't too long. Numbers 25. You're out here worshiping Baal Peor, and they paid the price for that. But there's the sense of what it could have been, what you were to me. And this is Hosea. Remember, he married a wife and she became unfaithful to him because of her being influenced by idolatry. She had children out of wedlock. Not my people. No more going to receive mercy. God has been driving home to Ephraim their sins, and we'll see this characteristic that's very important. What leads to backsliding? Oh, well, how come they departed from the Lord? There's some things that happen. There's some things that happen in the heart of Ephraim that I think it can be instructive for us. When we see people that are turned away from the Lord, it may be the same problem that Ephraim had. And we'll look at that in our lesson today as well. So we went from there, and we're going to look at question number 25. Notice at the end of chapter 9, he emphasizes the children, that they're going to not be spared. And what a sad thing, that Ephraim is smitten, their root is dried up, they shall bear no fruit, though they bring forth, yet I will slay beloved fruit of their womb. God's going to bring judgment upon them, and the children will suffer for it too. I'll cast them away because they did not hearken unto him, and they shall be wonders among the nations. As we've been emphasizing, we'll emphasize it again as we get in chapter 11. They're not going back to Egypt, but a lot of times it says Egypt, but here they're wandering in the wilderness. They're not going to have their place, their country any longer. So we come to chapter 10, and we see that Israel is a luxuriant vine. Here's a vine like my neighbor's vine. It just spreads all over my fence, my side of the fence. So what do when everything's in on your property? You do a little trimming, and you get yours what you want, and they can have their bushy things what they want. But I've seen some of these vines, and they spread real well, and it takes a lot of work to keep them trimmed. He says, he putteth forth his fruit according to the abundance of his fruit. He hath multiplied what? So it's not the vine. He said, as a vine just spreads and all produce all this fruit, but what is it producing? Idolatrous altars. You have multiplied his altars. One altar, Jerusalem. That's where the sacrifices were to be done according to the law. We got many of them because we're serving other gods. And we're giving lip service to Jehovah. We're his people, but we're worshiping other gods. And hypocrisy is what we see in them. So it's according to the goodness of their land, they have made goodly pillars. Here God has blessed them, and they supply the idolatrous pillars. Their heart is what? It's divided. It's divided. Now shall they be found guilty. He will smite their altars. He will destroy their pillars. Surely now shall they say, we have no king. Yeah, they did. What does he mean? Well, they had a king. Had a king up to the time that, the last, 4 out of 6 get murdered, but they have a king to replace them. But he said, we have no king. Why? For we fear not Jehovah. And the king, what can he do for us? I thought he didn't have a king. You got a puppet king. And the puppet king's not going to help you. And you've already left the important thing. What did they do? They'd already left the fear of God. They didn't have the fear of God. They didn't have a reverence for God. And so when they put him aside, what did they have left? A king that's just a puppet. He's not going to help them at all. And that's what's going to happen. And so God will bring the judgment upon them. That's coming. Smite their altars. And that gets us down to our next question. Any thoughts about that? I mean, here's a vine that could produce a lot of good, but Ephraim goes another direction. It was the largest particular tribe in Israel. That's why Ephraim is connected with Israel, and Israel's connected with Ephraim. It brought forth a lot of people. But what did they do with it? They went against God, and they're the first ripe fruit of the season. That's the way I looked at them. And look what they did to God. One of the problems we see with Samaria and Israel, and of course Samaria is the capital city, is the falsehood. And that's what we get into here. In chapter 10 and verse 5, why will the inhabitants of Samaria fear because of the calves of Beth-Haven? Let me remind you, where is Beth-Haven on your maps? Yeah, and it's Bethel. Bethel is what he's applying, and that's part. It's a house of vanity instead of the house of God. He just says it's Beth-Haven. You can go blind trying to find that city on a map. But what it is, remember Bethel, and when Jeroboam brought in idolatry with the calves, one was up there in Dan. Where was the other one? Bethel. Jeroboam started that. He did it out of convenience. It's too much for you to go all the way to Jerusalem. So we got one in the north and got one in the south. You just worship up there. And you can worship those idolatrous calf worship and that sort of thing. That'd be all right. And they were doing all of it. And God's not pleased with that. So he said the calves of Beth-Haven. We did the calf worship at Bethel, Dan, but Beth-Haven. It's no longer a house of God. So why is it called a house of vanity? Vanity. Vanity is empty. Vanity has no substance. Vanity will not help you. When you're depending on it, it's nothing. You see it, and your hand just goes right through it. It doesn't exist anymore. Is that what you're depending on? That'll be the terror for the calves of Beth-Haven. Why? Because those gods did not help them. Their puppet king, they had a king, didn't help them. They no longer feared Jehovah. That's the context we're looking at, and that's the fear that is coming upon them because of judgment. The people therefore shall mourn over it, and the priests thereof that rejoiced over it, for the glory thereof. Look, we got at Bethel and Dan, just like the nations around us, because it is departed from it. It also shall be carried into Assyria for a present to King Jareb. Who's King Jareb? That's not a particular king. It's a concept. It's one that is indeed one that is, there's a different thoughts about Jareb, but it's the idea of bringing conflict, and conflict is coming upon them. We're going to honor the king, but he's bringing conflict to your people. And so that he says King Jareb. Ephraim shall receive shame, and Israel shall be ashamed of his own counsel. We thought this was the wise thing to do, and we can worship as we wanted to. He said, as for Samaria, her king is cut off, as foam upon the water, or as we've seen before, as a piece of wood floating on the water. It's insignificant. It's like a twig going down the river. Insignificant. The high places also of Avon, vanity, where they're worshiping their gods, is empty. It's of substance to you in your own counsel, but it's not with God. The sin of Israel shall be destroyed. That's idolatry. The thorn, the thistle shall come up upon their altars. When you see things, you see things, mold come nice around it, and for a while the altars is the wonderful thing, and then you start seeing things grow over it. You see houses that haven't been taken care of, grass grows over it, and you begin to see things that were real important are no longer important, and things are deserted. Altars, you'll come up on their altars, and they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall upon us. Now, you know where I'm going with this question. That doesn't mean that I have the right question considering the text. But when you think about it a while and you see how God uses that, I think you'll probably have different ideas, but we'll get to one central thought. And we see it here in this experience. And I want you to see, where do you pick it up? Where I'm asking, what experience describes Israel's desire to see death rather those things that will bring death? What do I mean by that? I mean exactly what I'm asking for. I want you to get into that particular verse and work it out. Because I've had different ideas about that. And because I see one word, and then I see, I got to look at the other side of that. It's not a contradiction. It's just it's telling you what he meant by the first thing. So what we see, they shall say to the mountains, cover us, and to the hills, fall on us. What's coming? God's judgment. And it is going to be so bad, I would want this to happen. Now that we have to agree on that. That would be true. So they'll say to the mountains, because here comes this judgment, here comes the wrath of God upon us, here comes this Assyrian ruler and nation, and they'll say, mountains cover us, and to the hills fall on us. Why would you say that? That's drastic, isn't it? Now you say, they'll cover me because they'll hide me. What do the hills do? They fall on you. Some translations have, mountains, bury me. Bury me. I do not want to face this wrath. I'd rather die this death than what we're going to have to face with Assyria. That's the way I'm interpreting it. And cover does mean conceal, hide, but fall. As, mountains are strong, and they just bury me and just fall on me. I think he's still saying the same thing. Not, I just want to be hidden. When I get through all this stuff, we'll get out of that little hideout that we got. Thank you, mountains, and we'll go do what we want to do. There's no escaping that. Let's see how the New Testament uses this in Revelation. And again, you can look at it different ways there. In Revelation, the 6th chapter, we see they say to the mountains and to the rocks. Now, this is when God's judgment is going to come upon those who are oppressing God's people, Roman government, and judgment will be upon them. It says, and they say to the mountains, to the rocks, fall on us and hide us Hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath is come, and who is able to stand? Whose wrath is coming? The wrath of the Lamb. That's so great. It's so horrible. I'd rather have the mountains. I want them to hide. I want to hide us from the face of him that sitteth on the throne. He's too majestic, too powerful. I'd rather, I'm saying, die this death than face the wrath of the Lamb. So I'm still going the same way, even though you could say, I want to hide my face. But that's so bad, I'd rather have this fall on me, not cover me up and give me protection. You're not going to have any protection from the wrath of God. And that's going to be in the final judgment as well. And so I'm looking at this as hide me, because both of the wrath that's coming is so bad, I want to hide from it and then escape later. I want to hide from it, or I'd rather die this death. Just let the rocks crush me so I don't have to face what I'm going to have to face with the wrath of the Lamb. And I don't know how you interpret that. Most people say, hide me and protect me. Hide me, O thou great Jehovah, in the cleft of the rock, and let it pass. We have that concept. That's another concept, and that is true protection. And God wanted, you're not going to see Jehovah and live. So he protects him by the rocks. But I think he crushes people by the rocks. Bury me, with the mountains fall on me, valleys, the hills fall on me, because I do not want to face that. The imagery there, we can all agree, that's bad. I need protection from that. You might need protection from that. Cover me, but what about falling on you? That's not protection. Fall on me. There's only one translation I've found about the mountains cover me, because see, the word cover can be overwhelm me. That's why some translations have bury me, mountains. I'd rather be buried in an avalanche and completely crushed by the rocks than to face the wrath of the Lamb, or in this case, king that's going to rip your wife up with baby. And it's going to be a horrible type of judgment coming upon this luxuriant vine that could have produced so much good for God and didn't. And that's what's coming. Any comments or questions you might have? Did you have a third way of looking at it? I could never find a third way. But the point is, it's imagery that says, you don't want to face what you're getting ready to face. Something else would be either protecting or would be a better death than that. All right? Let's look at question 27. What is it always time to do? And that has a context too. Seek me while you can, while Jehovah can be found. And it implies that sometimes Jehovah can't be found, and so it's not going to do any good. So any time we could do this. But in this context, I think we can until the final judgment comes. So we're still in chapter 10. And beginning with verse 9, Israel, thou hast sinned from the days of Gibeah. There again, we go back to Gibeah, where Benjamin, that tribe was about wiped out completely, but it was saved. A horrible sin done, and then the nation turning on itself like it did. He goes back to that battle. There they stood, the battle against the children of iniquity. It doth not overtake them in Gibeah. When it is my desire, I will chastise them, and the people shall be gathered against them when they are bound to their two transgressions. And Ephraim is a heifer that is taught, that loveth to tread out the grain. But I have passed over upon her fair neck, And I will set a rider on Ephraim. Judah shall plow, Jacob shall break his clods. And so we see that leading up to verse 12. Now when we think about I will chastise them, but what were the two transgressions, do you think, that Ephraim had committed? And you could, and I just know what your foundation is. You know, he says two. Does that mean, well, it's more than one, so it's bad? Well, what did I say a while ago? Where were the calf worship started with Jeroboam? Dan and Bethel. That's two transgressions. That's the way a lot of commentaries look at it. Or you could say, this is what also they did, as Jeremiah states in chapter 2 and verse 13, where you've committed two transgressions. You're forsaken me, and what you've done, you've latched hold of that which is not going to give you water. Vessel it's not going to hold water. You're going into idolatry, and you're forsaking me. You're forsaking me and going to idolatry. That's two transgressions. Have they done that? That to me is the prominent one. If we were to say, what do we mean by that? As the prophet Jeremiah said, these are two transgressions, and he names them. So that would be a good one, because Ephraim has done that. Departed from their God and went for the idols. And that's what's bringing the terror upon them, because of the results of that. And so, what is this? Ephraim is a heifer that is taught, that loveth to why would a heifer like to tread out the grain in the Bible? Why would that be a good job? Got to think like a cow now. Get something to eat. You can always eat by treading out the grain. Do not muzzle the ox while he's treading out the grain. Well, that's an ox. An ox gets better treatment than a heifer. No, that's the way it goes. And she liked that, because she could always please herself. It's like a heifer that is taught, that loveth to tread out the grain, but I passed over her fair neck, and I will set a rider on Ephraim. And Judah is going to be involved in this too. Judah shall plow, and Jacob, which is Judah, shall break his clods. You're going into captivity, and Jacob will follow, and they'll be going, and they'll be doing work for another king. They will be doing, Ephraim's going to be taken off into Assyria. And there's going to be somebody ride her over there. And what pleased her, and look back, so that was a good job. Now I'm carrying this rider, and we're heading to Assyria, and that's where we're going to break up clods with Jacob, and going into talking about being in bondage to another nation. We'll be fulfilling their needs, what they like, not what I like. Description that what they had was so great, and they've lost that. So, sow to yourselves in righteousness, reap according to kindness, break up your fallow ground, for it is time to seek Jehovah till he come and rain righteousness upon you. What is it always time to do while you still have life and opportunity? Seek the Lord. Seek Jehovah. And of course, here comes breaking up the clods, rain's coming, being fruitful. He'll rain righteousness upon you. He will come. It's time to seek Jehovah. But they weren't going to do that. Any questions on that? You plowed wickedness. He just keeps the imagery going. You've reaped what? Iniquity. You've eaten the fruit of lies, for thou didst trust in thy way and the multitude of thy mighty men. My wisdom, we got power. We don't need God. That's what they did. Therefore shall a tumult rise among thy people. All thy fortresses shall be dissolved. As Shalman, who's that? Probably Shalmaneser. As Shalman, and we don't know this battle, but again, it must have been horrible. Destroyed Beth Arbel in the day of battle. The mother was dashed in pieces with her children. These people remembered that battle of what Shalmaneser has been able to do, and that's Assyria. And that's what's going to be their experience. So shall, and he speaks here Bethel, so shall Bethel do unto you because of your great wickedness. The house of the Lord is coming in judgment upon you, all your wickedness. At daybreak shall the king of Israel be utterly cut off. So he comes back because Bethel is still there. I mean, God's house is still here. And now he's bringing judgment. Any comments on chapter 10? All right. Number 28. In chapter 11, what attitude leads to backsliding? And I'm asking for one, but you could probably branch out in more than that, but definitely see one that we see taking place. That's true. They're seeking the way. So let's look at these first 4 verses and see the feeling you might have. When Israel was a child, then I loved him. Who's talking? God is. Hosea, step aside here. I'm talking. You're my mouthpiece. I'm talking. This comes from me. I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. The more the prophets called them, the more they went from them. They sacrificed unto the Balaam and burned incense to graven images. Yet I taught Ephraim to walk. I took them on my arms, but they knew not that I healed them. I drew them with cords of a man, with bands of love. What's he drawing him with? What are the cords of? What's drawing them? Love is. Love is. And I was to them as they that lift up the yoke on their jaws, and I laid food before them. Why would a cow like him or a horse like him? Oh, that yoke. Rest a while. Here's some food. I was like that to them, and caring for them and protecting them. And you're backsliding here in chapter 11. And I ask, what leads to that? How did God look at that? That's called ingratitude. That's called ingratitude. Well, God, you're kind of selfish. That's according to you. Take it up with God. God glorifies himself. You think he's he's not very humble? It's all about God's glory. It's creation, salvation, all through the New Testament. Glory be to God. And he wants his glory to be seen. And I just talk about going to heaven. Why do you want to go to heaven? John 17, Jesus says, I want them to be where I am so they can see my glory. You want to go to heaven to see Jesus' glory? That's why Jesus wants you to go to heaven. I want to go up there and talk to Apostle Paul and find out what it's all about, something I didn't understand. I'm going to see my friends there, going to drink coffee and donuts and whatever. Jesus says, I want you to see my glory and that you loved me before the foundation of the world. I want my people to see that. And you don't have that in your heart to go to heaven? If we don't study our Bibles, if we don't read our Bibles, we won't have the heart that Jesus wants us to have. I want to go to heaven to see Jesus' glory. And I don't think eternity will make that boring. It's just that fabulous. And I can see his glory and what he's done. And here's that's the whole point. I married you, and this is what I've given all these things, and you go off for other lovers, and they're not going to be able to help you. And then I buy you back when you're just a common prostitute. I buy you back because I care about you. I love you. And you treat me like this. It's called ingratitude. And when you see a father or a mother, and they got the little child on training wheels, and they're hovering over them and caring for them, does that child forget about that? You'll never forget about that as a parent. But you're helping along, and just a few, it won't be long, those little training wheels will be taken on, they'll be taken off. Will they ever appreciate those little laps you took with them down the sidewalk? Hovering over them, making sure they don't fall when they weren't real secure on training wheels? How will you feel when they say, I don't care about you, Mom. I don't care about you, Dad. Ingratitude. Where are the 10? Were 10 healed of their leprosy? How come only one comes? Where were the 10? Jesus, get over it. You got one. Ingratitude. And we begin to think, God, I made myself rich, not you. It's called ingratitude. And you want to know why people first depart from God? Because they think they've done it all themselves. They don't need God. And there's the ingratitude that was seen there. And that's the one that stands out to me. What stands out to you in chapter 11? That's not the whole verses about that. But you see anything else there that you want to bring up about that? All right. How is God not like man? And this is God speaking. I mean, this is his terminology, but it may be hard for us to understand what he means by that. And that's why I think it's a good question. How is God not like man? And I'm specifically dealing with verse 9. Let's lead up to it. How shall I give thee up, Ephraim? How shall I cast thee off? Now, first of all, let's go back, because this is an important verse in the New Testament. Verse 1 says, when Israel was a child, I loved him and called my son out of Egypt. How does Matthew bring this verse in the New Testament to our attention? What's the context in Matthew for this verse to be fulfilled? Yeah. Remember, he was being sought to be killed by Herod. Herod dies, and his son comes in. He's dangerous, so they go into Egypt. And then when it's time, he brings them out of Egypt. Well, that's Jesus Christ coming out. And we're looking here about ingratitude. Well, what would be the connection? Because Exodus 4, when Pharaoh is not letting the people go, it says, this is my firstborn son. Israel is my firstborn son. And I want him to go out and worship me. He's my firstborn. The whole tribe is his firstborn son. So a nation is called out of Egypt. And Jesus is called out of it. Let's start with Jesus. Why is Jesus in Egypt? For protection. Is that a fair statement? Protecting him from what? Herod. Holy Spirit guided parents to do that. So, in what sense was Israel, God's people, how were they protected in Egypt? Did they grow abundantly in Egypt? Did they know the Canaanite ways when they're in Egypt? No. They knew Egyptian. And now they get in here in Canaanite ways. They fall into that, and they're captivated by it. But there's a sense of being protected in both places, and I called them out when it was time for them to come. And so I think there's a connection that says, why would that verse, how could it be fulfilled in Jesus Christ? Because he's been protected, and God's people are being protected in a sense of growing and coming to when it's time for God to call them out of Egypt as well. So, how shall I give thee up, O Ephraim? How shall I cast thee off, O Israel? How shall I make thee, what is Admah and Zeboim? What are those two cities in history? What makes them significant? Sodom and Gomorrah. Those are the other two cities that were destroyed with them. So, how shall I cast thee off, Israel? How shall I make thee as Sodom and Gomorrah? I destroyed them. My heart is turned within me. My compassions are kindled together. I will not execute the fierceness of mine anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man. The Holy One in the midst of thee, and I will not come in wrath. Yeah, you will. That's what this whole book's about. You're coming in wrath. So what does he mean? Not contradicting that. What did he mean right here? That I'm God and not man, the Holy One in the midst of thee. Can we execute judgment out of wrath? Yeah. Can we show mercy? Yeah. He says, I will not execute the fierceness of my anger. I will not return to destroy Ephraim, for I am God and not man, the Holy One in the midst of thee. I will not come in wrath. He's saying, what is he saying? He's not going to come and just completely destroy them. That's what man would do if he got very angry. But I think it's more than that. It's that I am God and not man. And I could completely annihilate people. Man cannot do that with the whole world. He could do that, but I'm not coming like that. He's coming with discipline, and he's not going to completely destroy the people like he did Sodom and Gomorrah and those cities around there. So I think it's the immediate thing. I'm not God. I will not return to destroy Ephraim. I'm not coming back and doubling down. Maybe someone with a man's wrath would do that. But as a Holy One, and the mercy that he sets forth is from a Holy One as well. Because he's holy, sin is so horrible, he could completely destroy people. I won't be doing that to you. I think, to me, that's the only thing that makes sense. What's your thoughts about it, if you have any on that? I think our time is up. We'll start in chapter 11. What two ways was Judah not like Israel? And that's when we're going to see some things. That'll be a good place to start. There's a lot of those there. So we'll start there Wednesday week, because next Wednesday, Vacation Bible School, so you got a while to work on that. Thank you.